The message arrived when was reviewing the colony's quarterly food production reports. The alert chimed 3 times, each one sharper than the last. She looked up from her desk and saw the red priority flag blinking on her screen. Her stomach tightened. Red priority flags meant something serious was happening somewhere in the galaxy. Opened the message from the Galactic Council. Her eyes moved across the words quickly at first, then slower as she understood what they meant. The collective had started attacking neighboring star systems. 3 civilizations had already fallen. The Council was warning all Outer Rim colonies to prepare their defenses and stand ready. Then came the last part that made her hands shake. The Council was sending an inspector to Terrace Prime. His name was Commander of the Council. She sat back in her chair and stared at the message again. The Council did not send inspectors unless they thought something was very wrong. Would arrive in 3 days. He would evaluate their defenses, assess their military readiness, and decide if the colony was worth protecting or if everyone should leave. Looked out her office window at the colony sprawling below. Terrace Prime was humanity's oldest settlement on the Outer Rim. 2,000 people lived here, working the red soil, tending to crops that fed 3 nearby colonies. The planet had been harsh when they first landed 10 years ago. The gravity was heavy, the magnetic storms came without warning, and the mineral deposits under the ground made normal communication difficult. But the people of Terrace Prime had adapted. They had learned. They had built something good here. Now that might all end. She called Colonel David Harper, the colony's military commander. His response was immediate and honest. They had 3 old defense satellites, 10 fighters that were at least 15 years old, and 1 ground-based weapons system that worked maybe 70% of the time. Against the collective, these defenses were like standing in front of a storm with a rain jacket. When Commander arrived, he was nothing like expected. She had imagined someone loud and aggressive. Instead, was tall and quiet, with a body made of what looked like clear crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbow colors. His voice was soft and measured, but there was something in the way he moved that made clear he was dangerous. He was a warrior, even if he did not sound like one. Toward the colony within Colonel Harper. He walked through the settlement looking at their defenses, examining their weapons, watching their soldiers train. His expression never changed. When he saw the fighter jets, he asked how many they had. When told 10, he simply nodded. When he saw the weapons platform, he asked its firing range and capacity. Each answer seemed to confirm something he already knew. The turning point came when toured the farmland south of the colony, and Harper took him out to see the vast grain fields that stretched toward the horizon. They wanted to show him how productive Terrace Prime was, how much value the colony held. Instead, seemed unimpressed by the crops. He was watching the machinery. Jake was working his north field when the official group arrived. He sat in the cabin of a massive agricultural processor, the kind of machine that could clear, plant, or harvest 1,000 acres in a day. The machine was old but well maintained. Every joint moved smoothly. Every hydraulic system operated without leaking. Jake had spent years keeping the equipment running because out here, on the edge of civilization, there was no calling a repair person. You fixed what broke, or it stayed broken. Jake saw the group approaching and shut down the machine. He climbed out, wiping dirt from his face with an old. He was in his early 40s, broad across the shoulders from years of hard work. His hands were rough and from equipment and tools. When he walked toward them, he moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of land he stood on. Introduced them. Jake extended his hand to, but the commander did not shake it. Instead, looked at Jake with the same cold evaluation he had given everything else. During the tour of the fields, spoke about Terrace Prime's defenses. He did not hold back his opinion. He said the colony had no real military capability. He said the defenses were inadequate. He said the collective would destroy them easily. He spoke as if Jake and the others were not even there. When finished, Jake spoke up. His voice was quiet but clear. Sometimes survival is not about having the biggest weapons, Jake said. Sometimes it is about understanding what you have and using it in ways your enemy does not expect. Turned to look at him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the commander turned away. He did not acknowledge Jake's words. He did not respond. He simply looked back at the fields and the grain and the old machines and dismissed them all as unimportant. 2 hours later, sent his report to the Galactic Council. The report recommended immediate evacuation of all human personnel from Terrace Prime. The report stated that the colony had no meaningful defenses and could not survive an attack by the. The report concluded that Terrace Prime was indefensible and not worth protecting. That evening, sat in her office again, reading's report on her screen. She thought about the 2,000 people who had worked so hard to build this colony. She thought about Jake and his old machines. She thought about the grain fields and the red soil and the life they had all created here. Then she made a decision. She would not accept evacuation. She would not abandon Terrace Prime. If they were going to fight, they would fight. And somehow, she would need to find a way to make Commander believe that a colony of farmers might have more to offer than any of them realized. Called the meeting for the next morning in the colony's central hub. Every important person in Terrace Prime was there. Colonel Harper sat with his officers. Administrator officials took their seats around the long table. Engineers and scientists filed in. And Jake was there too, sitting near the back, still wearing his work clothes with red dust from the fields. Presented the situation without hiding anything. She explained what the collective was doing. She described the colonies they had already destroyed. She read parts of a report that said Terrace Prime could not be defended. Then she made her position clear. She did not want to evacuate. She wanted to fight. Colonel Harper stood up and presented their military options. He showed the numbers. 3 defense satellites that could fire on incoming ships. 10 aging fighter jets that were fast but not very well armed. 1 ground weapon platform that could hit targets up to 100 kilometers away. Against these defenses would buy them maybe 2 or 3 days if they were lucky. The room was quiet. People looked at each other. Some seemed ready to give up already. Others looked angry. No one looked hopeful. That was when Jake raised his hand. Nodded to him. Jake stood up slowly and walked to the front of the room. He was not a public speaker. He was a farmer, but he had something to say and people listened. I have been farming on Terrace Prime for 12 years, Jake began. When I first came here, this planet tried to kill me every single day. The gravity made it hard to move. The storms came without warning and destroyed equipment. The magnetic fields made it impossible to use standard communication. I could have given up. Many people did give up and left, but I stayed. And I learned. He paused and looked around the room. I learned that Terrace Prime is not a weak planet. It is a strong planet. It is dangerous and harsh, but those same things can be turned into strength if you understand them. We have adapted to this planet. We know how to live with it. They know how to fight with weapons, but they do not know how to fight with a planet that is against them. Commander was standing in the back of the room. He listened to Jake's words without expression. Jake continued. The magnetic storms here are stronger than anywhere else in this sector. The mineral deposits under our soil are denser. The gravity is heavier. These things make life hard for us, but they would be impossible for thee if they did not know what to expect, and they will not know. After the meeting, Jake was in the corridor walking toward the exit when appeared beside him. I want to see the farmlands, said. It was not a request. They met at dawn the next day. Jake picked up in an old ground transport vehicle. They drove south across the farmlands, and Jake showed the commander everything. He showed him the vast grain fields that stretched to the horizon. He showed him the underground irrigation systems that brought water from deep beneath the surface. He showed him the magnetic field monitors that the farmers used to predict the storms days in advance. They stopped at a high point overlooking the southern continent. Jake pointed out the mineral deposits visible in the exposed rock faces. He explained how dense the minerals were. He talked about how they interfered with communication and sensing equipment. A farmer has to understand the systems he works with, Jake said. The weather, the soil, the water, the seasons. You have to think about how everything connects. You have to predict what will happen before it happens. You have to adapt when things change. Listened but said nothing. They walked through one of the fields together. Jake stopped and picked up a handful of soil. He showed it too. Red dirt with small glimmers of mineral content. Think about war the way I used to think about farming, Jake said. They think bigger weapon beats smaller weapon. Bigger army beats smaller army. But that is wrong. It is like thinking a bigger hammer makes a better farmer. War is like farming. It is about understanding the system you are in. It is about using what you have. It is about patience. For the first time, looked at Jake differently. Not with respect yet, but with something other than complete dismissal. You claim you can defend this colony, said. With what? Your old machines and your understanding of soil. I claim we can make the wish they had never come here, Jake replied. Not by matching their weapons, but by making their weapons not work the way they are used to. Was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the fields. He looked at the sky. He looked at the mineral deposits in the rock. I will stay, said finally. I will see this colony's response to the arrival, but I warn you, farmer, if your plan fails, the council will blame you. They will blame this entire colony. Evacuation will become mandatory. People will die. People will die anyway if we run, Jake said. At least if we stay, we die fighting, and we might not die at all. That evening, Jake returned to the colony administration building. He asked for and Colonel Harper. He explained what he was thinking. He told them about the magnetic storms and the mineral deposits. He told them about the density of the soil and the deep underground systems. He told them about using what Terrace Prime was instead of fighting against it. Colonel Harper listened carefully. When Jake finished, the colonel was quiet for a moment. You are talking about using the planet itself as a weapon, Harper said. Yes, Jake replied. The planet that has been trying to kill us for 10 years might finally be the thing that saves us. Looked at Jake. She had taken a big risk refusing evacuation, but now she saw something in Jake's words that might give them a chance. It was not much of a chance, but it was something. Tell us everything, said. Tell us your plan. Jake took a deep breath. He was still just a farmer, but maybe that was exactly what they needed. Maybe they were so used to fighting soldiers and weapons that they had forgotten how to fight someone who understood the land they stood on. Jake spread a map of Terrace Prime across the large table in the war room. Colonel Harper stood on one side, stood on the other. Cross, the colony's lead engineer, stood at the end. Commander watched from a distance, his crystalline body reflecting the light from the screens. They have one way of fighting, Jake began, pointing to the map. They come in with overwhelming numbers. They use weapons that are stronger than anything their enemy has. They attack from orbit. They destroy the colony's defenses. Then they land troops and take what is left. He moved his finger across the map, marking different locations. But they have never fought on a planet like this one. The magnetic storms here are not like other planets. They are strong. They disrupt electronic equipment. The mineral deposits under the soil are so dense that sensors do not work properly. The gravity is heavy. All of these things that have made life hard for us will make life hard for them. Cross leaned forward, interested. Jake continued. We have massive agricultural equipment. Equipment that is designed to work in the harsh conditions of Terrace Prime. This equipment is old, but it is strong. The machines have hydraulic systems. They have electrical systems. They generate power when they run. He pointed to the northern sector of the map. What if we modified these machines? What if we could make them generate electromagnetic pulses? Not just small ones, big ones, strong ones. And what if we timed these pulses to match the magnetic storm cycle? His eyes went wide. She understood immediately what Jake was suggesting. You want to use the natural magnetic storms as a weapon, said. Use the equipment to amplify them. Yes, Jake said. When the storms come, the ships will already have trouble with their systems. If we add more electromagnetic interference, it could overwhelm their targeting computers. It could block their communications with the fleet. It could make their weapons systems lock up. Colonel Harper studied the map. He was thinking through the military implications. That would slow them down, Harper said slowly. But they would still come. We would still need to stop the ground invasion. Jake nodded. He moved to another section of the map. This area showed a large X marked in red. This is the mineral vein network beneath the southern landing zone, Jake said. These veins run deep but not far below the surface. The mining equipment we use for agriculture can access them. It can loosen them. And if we do it correctly, they will collapse when they land their ships on top. He looked at all of them. The warriors will land on ground that gives way beneath them. The equipment in their armor will fail because of the electromagnetic interference. Their sensors will not work. Their communications will be blocked. They will be separated from their main forces, confused, unable to coordinate. For a moment, no one spoke. Then our fighters can engage them, Colonel Harper said, seeing the possibility. With the confused and separated, our small force might actually have a chance. It is not a sure plan, Jake said. It will not work perfectly, but it gives us something we did not have before. It gives us a chance. Looked at Jake. She realized in that moment that she had been right. This farmer understood something that military officers sometimes missed. He understood systems. He understood how things work together. How long do you need to prepare? Asked. 2 weeks minimum, said. To modify the equipment, to prepare the electromagnetic generation systems, to set up the mining operation to destabilize the mineral veins without triggering collapses too early. 2 weeks if everything goes right. Jake nodded, and we have about 17 days before they arrive. It was not much margin, but it was possible. Over the next 14 days, Terrace Prime transformed into a place of organized chaos. Cross and Jake worked together constantly. They took Jake's old farming equipment and modified it. They added electrical systems that could generate pulses. They added timing systems that could synchronize with the magnetic storms. The work was hard and detailed, and there were many moments when something would not work and they would have to start over. Jake worked in his fields during the day preparing the mining operations. At night, he worked within the equipment bay, modifying the machines. He taught about how the machines moved, how they functioned, what they were capable of. Taught Jake about electrical systems and electromagnetic theory. Neither of them knew much about the other's field when they started, but together they learned. Commander observed everything. He watched Jake coordinate with the workers. He watched Jake make decisions when problems came up. He watched Jake adapt when the first electromagnetic pulse experiment almost destroyed one of the machines. Saw a man who was not following a pre-written plan. Saw a man who was thinking, adapting, and leading. On the last day before they were expected to arrive, Jake stood in the equipment bay with all the modified machines ready, was checking the final systems. Colonel Harper and were reviewing the military coordinates. Jake looked at all of them. These people had believed him. They had taken the risk. They had worked for 2 weeks straight, barely sleeping, pushing themselves to the limit. Now everything came down to whether his plan would work. When they arrive, Jake said quietly, they will think they are coming to destroy a weak colony. They will think we have no defense. And then they will learn that they made a mistake. They will learn what happens when you underestimate a people who have learned to survive. That night Jake walked out to his fields one last time before the battle. The grain was tall and ready for harvest. The equipment was all in place. The mining operation was ready. Everything he had built over 12 years might be destroyed in the next day, but he had done everything he could do. He looked up at the sky and waited for the to come. The collective arrived like a storm made of metal and death. 20 capital ships appeared on the sensors first, each one large enough to block out the sun. Behind them came hundreds of smaller attack vessels. Behind those came transport ships carrying thousands of warrior units. The entire fleet stretched across the sky like a second sky was falling on top of the first one. The Galactic Council broadcast a final evacuation order. They made it clear that Terrace Prime could not be defended. They demanded that all human personnel prepare to evacuate immediately. Did not respond to the evacuation order. Instead, she gave the signal to Jake. Jake was standing in the equipment bay with his hands on the control panel. Behind him, through the large windows, he could see the sky filling with ships. The light from their engines made it look like a second sun was rising. Jake pressed the button. In the farming zones across Terrace Prime, the modified agricultural equipment activated. Massive machines that had been designed to work the soil now worked against the sky. Electrical systems that had been built to power irrigation now generated electromagnetic pulses. The pulses were timed to match the natural magnetic storm that was happening that exact moment. The effect was immediate and devastating to the targeting computers locked up, communication systems filled with static. The fleet commander could not see his own ships clearly. He could not communicate with his attack vessels. Everything on his screens was chaos and noise. The response was to attack harder. If their technology would not work, they would simply destroy everything with brute force. The first orbital bombardment came down like rain, but the defense satellites, guided by Colonel Harper's pilots, were ready. They had been watching the ships carefully. The satellites fired up at the incoming weapons. Many of the weapons were destroyed before they reached the surface. Some got through, but the colony had prepared shelters. When the bombardment hit, Terrace Prime shook, but it did not fall. The fleet commander made a decision. Orbital bombardment was not working because their sensors could not guide the weapons properly. The colony's defenses were interfering with everything. It was time to land ground troops and take the colony by force. The transport ships descended toward the southern continent. They aimed for the broad landing zones where Terrace Prime's vast fields spread out toward the horizon. They wanted to land there because it was open ground. No obstacles, no hiding places, just clear space where their warriors could spread out and attack the colony. But they did not know about Jake's plan. As the transport ships descended, the ground beneath the landing zone began to collapse. The mineral veins that ran deep beneath the soil were connected. Jake had spent 2 weeks carefully destabilizing them with mining equipment. The work had been precise and dangerous. One mistake and the collapse would happen days too early or days too late, but Jake had timed it perfectly. When the transport ships tried to land, the ground simply gave way. The ships crashed into sudden sinkholes. Equipment fell into collapsed cavities. Landing struts broke. Cargo doors jammed. Warriors who were running down exit ramps found themselves falling into darkness. And as they fell and crashed, the electromagnetic pulses continued. The heavy armor that the warriors wore was full of electronics, sensors, communication systems, targeting systems. All of it was designed for normal conditions. All of it was failing. A warrior wearing armor that weighed 300 pounds, enhanced with electronic systems that made him nearly unstoppable, was suddenly just a heavy thing that fell. The armor systems could not help him jump back out. The communications could not call for help. He was trapped. The other transport ships saw what was happening and tried to land in different zones. But Jake had prepared for that too. The mining operations were spread across all the possible landing areas. The mineral veins ran everywhere beneath the colony. Everywhere they tried to land, the ground collapsed. Colonel Harper watched from the war room. He was waiting for Jake's signal. The moment came. Jake pressed another button. The electromagnetic pulses changed frequency. They stopped amplifying the natural storm and instead began targeting a different range, a range that the air support vehicles used for communication. The fighters that had been trying to provide air cover suddenly lost contact with their ground forces. They could not see clearly. They could not communicate. They were flying blind. Colonel Harper gave the signal. 10 aging human fighter jets lifted off from the colony's airfield. They were old. They were slow compared to some aircraft, but they were perfectly capable of shooting down confused enemy fighters. The human pilots had trained for this moment every day for the past 2 weeks. They knew how to use the electromagnetic interference. They had learned to rely on visual targeting and instinct instead of their own electronic systems. The pilots, dependent on technology that was not working, were helpless. The first exchange of fire happened at 2 kilometers altitude. The human jets had the advantage. They were fast. They were maneuverable, and most importantly, they could see what was happening while the fighters were dealing with dead instruments and static-filled communications. In the war room, Jake watched the battle unfold on the screens. Colonel Harper coordinated the fighters, watched the defense of the colony, and Jake watched the ground, waiting for the moment when the warriors, finally recovering from their crash landings, would attempt to reorganize and attack. That moment came after 30 minutes. The warrior units that had survived the crash landings were trying to regroup, but they were scattered. They were separated. They were isolated from their main forces. Their armor was failing. Their weapons would not fire because the targeting systems were locked up. And across the farmlands, the human soldiers were waiting. Colonel Harper sent ground troops into the fields, not massive numbers, but soldiers who knew the land, soldiers who had trained with Jake in understanding the terrain, soldiers who could move through the fields that they had never seen before. The battle on the ground was brief and brutal. The warriors were powerful and well-trained, but they were few and they were scattered. The human soldiers had numbers and terrain advantage. They had surprise, and they had hope. In the sky, the last of the fighters broke off combat and tried to escape. They flew upward, trying to reach orbit and safety. Half of them made it. The rest were shot down. 35 minutes after the first transport ship crashed, it was over. The fleet commander, seeing his invasion force destroyed and his ships unable to function properly, made a decision. He gave the order to retreat. The mighty collective, undefeated in 17 previous campaigns, was leaving. The ships that could still fly began ascending toward space. The damaged ships fired their engines, struggling to reach orbit. The fleet that had looked unstoppable when it arrived now looked broken and confused. And watching from the war room, Jake understood something fundamental. He had grasped the blade, not the blade of a weapon, but the blade of wisdom, the blade of understanding. The blade that said sometimes the weak can defeat the strong if they are willing to think differently. The ships disappeared into space, leaving behind wreckage and silence. For the first time in 40 hours, the alarms in the colony stopped screaming. The red warning lights faded. The emergency notifications stopped coming. Terra's Prime had survived. Sat in the war room, barely able to believe what had happened. Colonel Harper was outside, organizing the cleanup and search and rescue operations. The human soldiers were out in the fields, making sure there were no remaining threats. And Jake was standing at the window, looking out at the damage to his farms. The grain fields were destroyed. The equipment was damaged. The southern continent looked like it had been torn apart, which it basically had been. All of Jake's work, all of his careful preparation, all of it was gone. Found him there, looking out at the wreckage. For a long moment, they stood together without speaking, then began to talk. In all my years with the council, I have learned that power takes many forms, said. His voice was quiet and measured the way it always was, but something had changed in it. I believed power was weapons and numbers and technology. I was wrong. Jake did not turn from the window. You showed me something that the council has forgotten, continued. Humans are not weak. Humans are adaptable. You take what you have. You understand your surroundings. You think differently. You survive. Paused. They have conquered 17 civilizations, not because they are invincible, but because those civilizations fought them the way they wanted to be fought, with weapons and direct combat. They lost. Jake finally turned to look at. You fought the way a farmer fights the land, said, not against it, but with it, using its strengths, understanding its systems. That is something the council needs to learn. Extended his hand. This time Jake took it. I am going back to the Galactic Council with a very different report, said. I am going to tell them that they made a mistake, a grave mistake. They have underestimated humanity, and they need to change. That evening, the colony gathered in the central hub. People were tired and worn out and hungry, but they were alive. No one had died in the defense of Terrace Prime. The colony had survived against impossible odds. Gave a speech honoring Colonel Harper and his soldiers. She honored Cross for her brilliant engineering work, and she presented Jake with the Civilian Medal of Valor, the highest award given to non-military personnel. This colony exists because one man refused to accept that we were weak, said. This colony exists because one man understood that sometimes wisdom is more valuable than weapons. Jake, you have shown us what humans are truly capable of. The room erupted in applause. Jake felt uncomfortable with all the attention. He was not a public person. He was a farmer, but he stood and accepted the medal. Approached him after the ceremony. She was tired but smiling. That was remarkable, said. Working with you, I learned more about how to think about problems than I learned in 15 years of engineering school. Jake shook his head. You did all the hard technical work. I just had ideas. No, said firmly. You showed me how to think like a farmer, how to understand systems, how to see problems differently. That is worth more than any training I could have gotten. I am going to keep working on these agricultural machines. I am going to keep developing them. I think we can teach other colonies how to defend themselves using methods like this. Jake felt something shift inside him. The defense of Terrace Prime had not been just about one battle. It was the beginning of something larger. Humans across the galaxy could learn. They could adapt. They could survive. 3 days later, Jake went back to his farm. The damage was extensive. The grain fields were mostly destroyed. The mineral veins he had destabilized for the defense had collapsed the soil in multiple places. Equipment was damaged or broken. It would take months to repair everything. He stood in the middle of what used to be his northern field and looked at the wreckage. For a moment, he felt the weight of despair. Everything he had built was gone. Then he thought about something his father had told him once. Farming is not about never failing. It is about failing and then starting again. Crops will be destroyed by storms. Equipment will break. Animals will die. Markets will change. But the farmer gets up and plants again. The farmer rebuilds. The farmer continues. That was the truth of farming. That was the truth of life. Jake picked up a piece of broken equipment. He looked at it, thinking about what could be done to fix it. He looked at his fields and thought about what seeds he would plant next season. He looked at the damaged mineral deposits and thought about how he could repair the soil. It would take time, but Terrace Prime would recover. The colony would rebuild. The Galactic Council's official decision came through 2 weeks later. Terrace Prime was designated as a human protectorate world. It was under the protection of the Council now. A small military garrison would be stationed there, and Jake was offered a position as strategic advisor to the Council. The offer was generous. It would make him important. It would give him status and wealth and influence. Jake declined. He sent a message back to the Council explaining that he was a farmer. He belonged in the soil. He belonged with his crops and his equipment and his land, but he offered to train others. He offered to teach them the methods that had worked at Terrace Prime. He offered to help other colonies understand how they could defend themselves using the unique characteristics of their worlds. The council accepted his offer, and so Jake returned to his farm. He worked every day, repairing the soil and the equipment. He taught classes in the colony's central hub about systems thinking and adaptation. He mentored young engineers and soldiers, showing them how to see their world differently, and he rebuilt his grain fields. By the time the next planting season came, Terrace Prime was already becoming known throughout the galaxy, not as a weak colony of farmers, but as the place where humans had defeated the place where wisdom and adaptation had proven stronger than brute force. Jake stood in his fields at sunset one evening, looking out at the young grain just starting to grow. The scars of battle were still visible on the land, but the land was healing. Life was returning. He realized that he had finally understood something he had always known but never fully grasped. A farmer holds a blade. The blade is not metal. The blade is wisdom. The blade is the understanding that systems can be shaped, that solutions can come from unexpected places, that sometimes the most powerful weapon is knowing how to work with the world instead of against it. She thought he was just a farmer. She had been wrong. In that one man was the strength of an entire world. In that one man was the understanding that saved Terrace Prime. And in that one man was the proof that humanity was capable of so much more than the galaxy had ever believed possible. The sun went down over the fields of Terrace Prime, and Jake stood alone, finally at peace, finally understanding that the farmer had grasped the blade, and that blade would change the course of history.